June 6th, 1944, 6:35 hours. Strongpoint WN62, Omaha Beach. Gefreiter Heinrich Severloh pulled the trigger of his MG-42 machine gun for the first time that morning. Through his gun sight, he watched American soldiers, boys really, barely out of high school, fall on the sand below. He would pull that trigger again and again for 9 straight hours. By day's end, 13,500 empty shell casings would surround his position. His gun barrel would be warped from heat. He had written to his girlfriend just 3 days earlier. "The invasion will be their grave. We will throw them back into the sea within hours." Instead, he would be found weeping uncontrollably, watching an invasion force so vast his mind simply refused to process it. Severloh believed he was defending an impregnable fortress, the Atlantic Wall that Hitler himself had declared could never be breached. But what he witnessed that morning would shatter everything he'd been taught about German superiority, about warfare, about reality itself. How did German soldiers, who had conquered most of Europe, experience the largest amphibious invasion in history from the wrong side of the gun? How did their confidence transform into psychological collapse within hours? The answer reveals why courage alone could never defeat industrial mathematics. The Atlantic Wall stretched 2,400 miles from Norway to the Spanish border, what German propaganda called the most formidable defensive line in military history, consuming 17 million cubic meters of concrete and 1.2 million tons of steel across years of construction. Along the Normandy coast, 58 divisions of varying quality and experience manned positions that Hitler himself had personally declared impregnable, a word that would haunt German defenders within hours. The defensive preparations at Omaha Beach alone seemed to justify such absolute confidence. U.S. Army Center of Military History records document with precision what German engineers had constructed. 8 concrete bunkers, 35 pillboxes, 4 artillery positions, 18 anti-tank gun positions, 45 rocket launcher sites, 85 machine gun nests, and 6 mortar pits. The beach itself had been systematically transformed into a killing field through months of engineering work. 3,700 obstacles had been planted in the tidal zone, Belgian gates, Czech hedgehogs, wooden stakes, many topped with telemines designed to destroy landing craft. Behind the beaches, 6.5 million mines had been carefully laid in patterns, though Rommel had wanted 60 million. Colonel Ernst Goth, commanding the 916th Grenadier Regiment near Bayeux, had meticulously calculated defensive firepower in his sector with the precision of a mathematician solving an equation. His 4 artillery batteries could theoretically deliver 120 rounds per minute into designated beach sectors. Combined with other batteries across the defensive network, Germans could concentrate devastating firepower on any landing attempt, creating interlocking fields of fire that seemed mathematically impossible to survive. These calculations, however, rested on a fatal assumption that would prove catastrophically wrong: unlimited ammunition availability. June 5th had brought weather that Luftwaffe meteorologist Walter Stobbe in Paris had confidently declared impossible for any invasion attempt. Wind speeds reached 20 to 25 knots, waves climbed to 6 feet, and low clouds hung oppressively at 500 feet, conditions that seemed to guarantee German security. Stobbe, using data carefully collected from U-boats prowling the Atlantic and weather stations scattered across occupied Europe, had assured the High Command with professional certainty that these poor conditions would persist for at least 2 weeks, perhaps longer. Based on this meteorological forecast that seemed unshakable, many senior officers had taken the opportunity to leave their posts for the first time in months. Rommel himself, the Desert Fox, Germany's most celebrated field commander, had departed for Germany on June 5th to celebrate his wife Lucy's birthday, carrying a pair of grey suede shoes he had purchased in Paris as a gift. General Friedrich Dollmann, commanding the critical 7th Army, had ordered division commanders to attend war games at Rennes, pulling experienced leadership away from the coast at the worst possible moment. Even routine naval patrols that normally swept the channel had been cancelled due to the rough seas that seemed to provide perfect security. This meteorological confidence would prove to be the first catastrophic German miscalculation of many that day. Unknown to Stobbe and his weather service, the Allies possessed weather stations in Greenland and conducted regular weather flights far over the Atlantic that detected something German forecasters missed. A brief break in the storm pattern, a narrow 36-hour window that Group Captain James Stagg had identified and Eisenhower had courageously seized, despite enormous risks. At 23:15 hours on June 5th, radar stations along the Norman coast began detecting unusual activity that initially seemed like another Allied deception operation. Freya and Würzburg radar sets, Germany's most sophisticated detection equipment, picked up massive aerial formations approaching from the north across the channel. The operators, battle-hardened veterans who had seen countless RAF raids, had witnessed this pattern before Allied deception raids deliberately designed to keep German forces on constant alert, wearing down morale and wasting resources responding to phantom threats. By 0:30 hours on June 6th, however, reports began flooding into headquarters that fundamentally challenged all comfortable assumptions about Allied intentions. Fallschirmjäger paratroopers were landing across Normandy in what seemed like overwhelming numbers, but the reports made absolutely no tactical sense to German intelligence officers. Some units reported paratroopers landing to the east, others to the west. Some claimed they were British, judging by equipment, others swore they were American. The confusion multiplied as dummy paratroopers, part of Operations Titanic and Rupert, equipped with firecrackers that simulated gunfire, added to the chaos. Major Hans von Luck, commanding the 125th Panzer Grenadier Regiment of the 21st Panzer Division, positioned inland, was among the very first German officers to grasp the situation's true gravity with the clarity of professional military judgment. Awakened by urgent reports of paratroopers landing in strength near his carefully prepared positions, he immediately grasped the strategic implications and requested permission to attack, while the airborne forces were still vulnerable and disorganized. The response from division headquarters, delivered with bureaucratic caution that would prove fatal, was devastating. "Do not move until the situation clarifies further." Von Luck would later write in his acclaimed memoir Panzer Commander, published decades after the war. "I knew at that precise moment we were lost. The paratroopers were clearly marking flanks for a massive amphibious landing. Every minute we sat paralyzed by our own command structure gave them irreplaceable time to consolidate positions and organize defenses." As the first grey light of June 6th began to slowly illuminate the channel's waters, German observers in forward positions began reporting something that their extensive training and years of combat experience had never prepared them to witness or comprehend. From horizon to horizon, as far as the eye could see in every direction, the sea was covered with vessels of every conceivable size and description. Not dozens, not hundreds, but thousands ships spreading across the channel like an impossibly vast grey carpet that seemed to cover the entire ocean. The invasion fleet consisted of 6,939 vessels, according to meticulously compiled official Allied records. 1,213 warships, ranging massive battleships to destroyers, 4,126 landing craft of various types, 736 ancillary vessels, and 864 merchant ships, the largest naval armada ever assembled in the entire history of human warfare. To German defenders raised on years of propaganda about Allied weakness, division, and industrial inferiority, the sight was psychologically devastating in ways that went beyond mere military shock. This was the whole world arriving on their doorstep, proving every propaganda lie with undeniable visual evidence. Bernhard Frerking, an artillery officer at WN 62 who would be killed later that terrible day, reportedly told his men with the resignation of someone witnessing inevitable doom, "We are witnessing the whole world arriving on our doorstep. There is no defense against this." At 5:35 hours precisely, the naval bombardment commenced with a violence that defied everything German defenders thought they understood about the limits of firepower. Nothing in their collective experience, not the Eastern Front's desperate battles, not the heaviest RAF bombing raids on German cities had prepared them for the sheer overwhelming scale of what followed in those first minutes. The battleship USS Texas alone fired 255 14-inch shells at Pointe du Hoc in just 34 minutes, according to Naval History and Heritage Command records, each shell weighing 1,500 pounds, each creating a crater large enough to swallow a truck. HMS Warspite, the first ship to open fire on D-Day at approximately 5 hours, would deliver over 315 15-inch shells in the first 2 days of operations, including 96 rounds fired at German positions on June 9th, when defenders attempted to counterattack. The cumulative bombardment from the entire naval force, hundreds of ships firing thousands of shells, exceeded anything the Wehrmacht had previously encountered in any theatre of the war. According to German veterans' accounts meticulously collected by the German Federal Archives in post-war, interviews, concrete bunkers specifically designed to withstand any bombardment began cracking under the relentless naval gunfire like eggshells. Men were buried alive beneath collapsed concrete, desperately dug out by comrades, then buried again as shells continued raining down in seemingly endless waves. The psychological impact proved as devastating as the physical destruction. These fortifications in which they had placed absolute confidence were crumbling like children's sandcastles. As the naval bombardment continued with unrelenting fury, the Luftwaffe's response, or rather its complete absence, revealed the true desperation of Germany's strategic position with brutal clarity. Oberstleutnant Josef Pips Priller, commanding Jagdgeschwader 26, received urgent orders from Luftwaffe headquarters to attack the massive invasion fleet with his entire force available in the sector. His response, recorded with bitter irony in the Wing's war diary, captured the absurdity of Germany's situation. What entire force? I have exactly 2 operational planes. The Luftwaffe, which had once promised absolute air superiority over any invasion attempt, could muster only 319 sorties on D-Day against 14,674 Allied sorties, a ratio of nearly 50-to-1 that made meaningful resistance mathematically impossible. According to U.S. Navy Office of Naval Intelligence records, Priller and his wingman Unteroffizier Heinz Wodachik made the Luftwaffe's only attack on the beaches during the critical morning hours a single strafing run across Sword Beach in their FW 190 Amperes, 8 fighters before, fleeing from overwhelming Allied fighter cover that swarmed like angry hornets. This futile gesture by 2 lone aircraft against an invasion force of thousands became a powerful symbol of German impotence. The promised Knights of the Air who would darken the skies over any invasion had been reduced to a meaningless gesture that changed nothing. At 6:30 hours, the first assault waves hit the beaches with a violence that would define the day. German defenders, despite the devastating bombardment they had endured, somehow manned their surviving positions and opened fire with the discipline of professional soldiers. What followed was carnage that shocked even hardened combat veterans who had fought across multiple theatres. Heinrich Severloh, the machine gunner at Strongpoint WN 62, began firing at 6:35 hours precisely. His position, one of the very few undamaged by the massive naval bombardment, commanded perfect overlapping fields of fire across Omaha Beach's deadly expanse. In his 2005 memoir WN 62, Erinnerungen an Omaha Beach, he stated he fired approximately 13,500 rounds over 9 continuous hours of combat. While Severloh claimed to have inflicted between 1,000 to 2,000 casualties personally, military historians note this number is likely exaggerated, given that total American casualties at Omaha Beach from all causes were approximately 2,400. What remains certain is that his MG-42, firing at a mechanical rate of 1,200 rounds per minute in disciplined short bursts, contributed significantly to what became known as Bloody Omaha. The German defenders began experiencing what military psychologists would later term material shock, the complete mental breakdown caused by confronting overwhelming industrial force that defies comprehension. No matter how many Americans, British or Canadians fell on the beaches, more appeared from the endless waves of landing craft. Every destroyed landing craft was instantly replaced by 3 more. Every silenced machine gun position was immediately suppressed by naval gunfire that seemed utterly unlimited. By midday, German positions across Normandy began reporting critical ammunition shortages that exposed the fatal flaw in all their defensive planning. The carefully calculated defensive plans had based ammunition expenditure on repelling a limited assault lasting perhaps 24 to 48 hours. Nobody, not Rommel, not his staff, not Hitler himself, had planned for this unprecedented scale of sustained attack. According to Wehrmacht supply records, positions that had ammunition carefully calculated for a 3-day defensive battle exhausted their entire supplies within hours of intense combat. Artillery batteries, theoretically the backbone of the beach defense system, faced identical crises. The carefully husbanded ammunition supplies vanished under the intensity of combat that exceeded every calculation. Desperate attempts to bring forward reserve stocks from inland depots failed completely. Every road, every path, every trail was under constant, relentless Allied fighter-bomber attack. The contrast with Allied firepower was psychologically devastating to German observers. American destroyers would casually fire hundreds of shells at single German positions, while German artillery batteries were severely rationed to just 4 shells per gun per day by the afternoon of D-Day, a restriction that made effective fire support essentially impossible. The German armour reserve, the mobile striking force that Rommel had repeatedly insisted must defeat any invasion directly on the beaches, within hours remained completely paralysed through the critical morning hours when counterattack might have succeeded. The 21st Panzer Division, the only significant armoured unit positioned close enough to the beaches to make an immediate difference, did not receive orders to attack until 10:00 hours, a full 4 hours after the landings began. 4 hours in which Allied forces consolidated beachheads and brought ashore thousands of reinforcements. When the 21st Panzer finally attacked at 16:20 hours, they advanced cautiously between British airborne landing zones toward the coast near Sword Beach. According to meticulously kept divisional records, they actually reached the shore between Lyon-sur-Mer and Luc-sur-Mer around 19:00 hours, the only German armoured unit to reach the coast on D-Day. A small tactical victory. However, at 21 hours, they witnessed the arrival of Operation Mallard 250 massive gliders, bringing reinforcements and heavy equipment to the British 6th Airborne Division in broad daylight. Interpreting this massive air armada as a serious threat to their exposed flanks, division commanders ordered immediate withdrawal. The division lost 54 tanks and armoured vehicles on D-Day alone, approximately 25% of their total strength destroyed or disabled in a single day of combat. The counterattack also encountered specialised Allied armour they had never seen before and had no tactical doctrine to counter. Hobart's funnies modified tanks with mine-clearing flails, flamethrowers, and bridging equipment that seemed to belong to a completely different era of mechanised warfare. Throughout D-Day, German units across Normandy faced a threat they had never encountered at this overwhelming scale. Massive airborne forces operating deep behind their defensive lines, creating chaos far out of proportion to their actual numbers. The British 6th Airborne Division and the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions created confusion that multiplied their strength through psychological warfare. Oberst Friedrich von der Heydte, Germany's most experienced paratrooper commander, serving with the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, provided a professional assessment recorded in post-war interviews that was brutally honest. The Allied airborne operation was everything ours had never been: massive in scale, precisely coordinated, and continuously supplied. We had dropped battalions in our operations. They dropped entire divisions. We were supplied by occasional single aircraft. They had endless streams of gliders and transport planes bringing equipment and reinforcements. The psychological impact of paratroopers, seemingly appearing everywhere simultaneously, paralysed German tactical responses. Units refused to move, fearing ambush from unseen airborne soldiers. Others fired frantically at shadows, sometimes at their own men in the confusion. The chaos multiplied German problems exponentially, just when decisive action was most critical. As D-Day progressed through afternoon into evening, German command and control disintegrated completely at every level. Allied aircraft systematically destroyed communication lines with methodical precision. French resistance fighters, activated by coded BBC messages broadcast the previous night, cut telephone cables and destroyed relay stations throughout Normandy. Radio communications that survived were jammed by sophisticated Allied electronic warfare units operating from ships offshore. General Lieutenant Max Pemsel, Chief of Staff of the 7th Army, attempted desperately to coordinate the defense from his headquarters at Le Mans. His war diary, preserved in archives, records increasing frustration as contact with forward units simply disappeared like lights going out across a map. By noon, entire divisions had vanished from the communication network completely. Individual unit commanders made life or death decisions in complete isolation, without knowledge of the larger situation, without reinforcements, without hope of coordinated response. As darkness fell on June 6th, surviving German defenders across Normandy took stock of their catastrophic situation. The supposedly impregnable Atlantic Wall had been breached in multiple places within hours. The Luftwaffe had essentially ceased to exist over Normandy as a meaningful fighting force. The Kriegsmarine had managed to sink exactly one destroyer, USS Corrie, while losing 15 E-boats and numerous smaller craft in futile attacks against the overwhelming Allied naval superiority. General Lieutenant Wilhelm Richter, commanding the 716th Infantry Division, which had borne the brunt of the British assault at Golden Sword Beaches, sent a devastating report to 7th Army headquarters that night. Division combat strength, 35% of authorized levels, all. Coastal strongpoints lost. Artillery, 90% destroyed or captured. Enemy forces advancing steadily inland against minimal resistance. The statistics told an undeniable story of complete tactical failure, despite individual German acts of heroism and sacrifice. In a single day, German forces in Normandy had suffered casualties equivalent to those of a major Eastern Front battle, while the Allies continued landing fresh troops and supplies, as if D-Day was merely the beginning, not the climax. Throughout the following days and weeks, German reinforcements attempting to reach Normandy discovered that every assumption about modern warfare had become obsolete. The 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich, stationed near Toulouse in southern France, took 17 days to reach Normandy, a journey that should have taken 3 days maximum. They arrived having lost 30% of their vehicles to constant air attack without firing a single shot at ground forces. If they couldn't even reach the battlefield intact, how could they hope to influence it? Meanwhile, Allied logistics operated with efficiency that seemed to belong to a different century of military science. LSTs, landing ship, tank discharged entire armoured regiments in mere hours. Within days of D-Day, the Allies were landing 15,000 tons of supplies daily, more than the entire German army in Normandy, consumed in a week of combat. The Falaise Pocket in August 1944 became the graveyard where German forces in Normandy finally died. According to Allied intelligence reports confirmed by post-war German records, approximately 10,000 Germans died in the pocket and 50,000 were captured. Over 300 tanks and armoured vehicles were destroyed along with 2,500 other vehicles. German soldiers attempting to escape described scenes of apocalyptic destruction that haunted survivors for decades. Roads were literally carpeted with dead horses and burning vehicles. Allied fighter bombers attacked in waves every 20 minutes like clockwork. Artillery fell continuously from positions that seemed to have unlimited ammunition. The final accounting of the Normandy campaign tells an undeniable story of complete German defeat at every level: tactical, operational, strategic, and psychological. German losses, June 6th, August 31st. Approximately 320,000 casualties total. 30,000 killed in action, 80,000 wounded, many permanently disabled, 210,000 missing or captured, 2,300 tanks destroyed, virtually all armour in France, 2,127 aircraft lost from an already depleted force. Allied losses, same period, 29,672 casualties with replacements exceeding losses daily. Approximately 4,000 tanks lost, replaced within weeks. 4,101 aircraft lost from a force exceeding 13,000 planes. disparity revealed the fundamental truth that German professional officers had understood but couldn't voice. Germany was fighting an attrition battle. It could never win against enemies with virtually unlimited industrial reserves. Professional German military officers, after the war ended, provided the most brutally honest assessments of the Normandy disaster. Generaloberst Heinrich Eberbach, who assumed command in Normandy after Rommel was wounded, reported to OKW on August 1st with cold mathematical precision. The enemy's material superiority is at least 2 0 to 1 inch artillery, 1 0 to 1 inch tanks, and absolute in aircraft. He can replace all losses within days. We cannot replace anything. We are simply being ground down by industrial mathematics. General der Panzertruppe Hans Speidel, Rommel's chief of staff, wrote in his 1949 memoir with the clarity of hindsight, "Normandy proved conclusively that courage alone could not overcome industrial supremacy. We faced an enemy who had mechanized not just warfare, but victory itself through systematic production." D-Day, from the German perspective, was not merely a military defeat, it was a complete ideological and psychological collapse that shattered every assumption about warfare, superiority, and national destiny. Heinrich Severloh, the machine gunner of WN-62, spent the rest of his life haunted by June 6th. In his 2005 memoir, he wrote about meeting American D-Day veterans decades later. "We all realized we had been young men thrown into an industrial slaughterhouse. My 13,500 rounds meant nothing against their unlimited replacements and industrial capacity." The German defenders of Normandy learned history's hardest lesson in the most brutal way possible. In the age of industrial warfare, nations that cannot match their enemy's production capacity are doomed to defeat, regardless of their soldiers' skill, courage, or sacrifice. They began June 6th as confident warriors of the Third Reich, believing their defensive positions impregnable. They ended it as witnesses to the arsenal of democracy, displaying its full, terrifying efficiency. Unlimited ships, planes, tanks and supplies, flowing from factories whose capacity exceeded German comprehension. The beaches of Normandy became not just a battlefield, but a revelation. German soldiers witnessed the future of warfare, and it belonged entirely to the societies that could produce the most material and apply it most efficiently through systematic organization. They had brought courage, training, determination, and tactical skill to the battle. The Allies brought unlimited industrial production and the logistics to deploy it. In trying to hold back the Allied invasion, the German defenders might as well have been trying to hold back the tide itself with their bare hands. The invasion they had confidently promised to throw back into the sea within hours had instead swept them away completely, carrying with it the last illusions of German victory and proving that modern war was won not on battlefields, but in factories producing shells faster than soldiers could fire them.